Hello, and welcome to this session of the Ditch Summit, sponsored by Q and run by Adobe. And I am your host, Matt Miller. Super excited to have you in this session of the Ditch Summit, where we are talking about teacher wellness, getting to be your best self and getting yourself physically, emotionally, spiritually prepared and renewed to be at our best for our students. And so we have a wonderful slate of presenters that hope that you are loving. And today's guest is no exception. I'm super excited to have Amber Harper on. And Amber is the CEO and the chief blogger and creator and all of that of the Burned In Teacher. And so we're going to be talking a lot about burnout here, how we can avoid it, what burnout is all about. And I know this is going to be a fantastic session. So let me introduce you to Amber. So Amber, thank you so much for being on this session. Can you tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure, of course. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here. So yeah, my name's Amber. I actually live here in Indiana, same state as Matt. So we're both Hoosiers. I live in Fort Wayne, Indiana with my family, my husband, who's an elementary school principal, and two kiddos who are in public education. So Burned In Teacher, our mission is just to activate teacher self-empowerment. And really, Burned In Teacher was born literally out of my burnout. It was after I was really inspired by a Google Summit that I went to in April of 2016. I went there so burned out, really struggling, and not for the first time. But when we were coming home from that summit, I was 180 degrees different and had a different view of my reality on the way home. And I actually came up with Burned In Teacher because it is the exact opposite of Burned Out Teacher, and bought the domain the next day and started writing about my shame that had surrounded my burnout and my story and how it had impacted my entire life. But I also blogged about how I started to bring Google tools into my classroom with my first graders who were one-to-one with iPads. And so shared both my story of burnout, but also my story of burn in, and how I had just realized that I needed to take responsibility for my own burnout, and I needed to stop the shame, talk about it, open up conversations, and share what I was doing about it, essentially.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And I know that's something that a lot of us, including me, can really relate to. I thought that was so interesting that you talked about how you felt shame in your burnout. And I know exactly what you're talking about there. Can you touch on that a little bit about, either a little bit about your own story there, or maybe why do you think we connect to that shame to, to feeling burnout? Like we feel that. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of times the way that we verbalize it can be looked at as being negative if we're not essentially asking for the support that we really need, and realistic support, right? So when I think about my roller coaster of burnout from 2007, when I first started teaching, I wrote it, and I write about how I feel like looking back into, really reflecting on my patterns, I really feel like I built and rode my own roller coaster, because I didn't realize the power that I had if I would have really verbalized the fact that, number one, I'm really struggling with this thing, and had those hard conversations, and in a way of really seeking understanding and seeking support. So I quote Stephen Covey quite a bit. Those 7 habits are no joke. And, when we come from a place of really wanting to understand before trying to be understood, those are sometimes really hard conversations. But I think what happened with me is that through the years, I confused seeking support and seeking understanding for venting. I thought they were one and the same. And I think that is a pattern that a lot of us, not just in education, but just in life in general, we kind of fall into. We think that we are taking care of ourselves, and we can talk about my whole perception of self-care here in a little bit if you'd like, but we confuse that, that desire to sit around a table with friends, over a cup of coffee or a bottle or 3 of wine, and just vent, and talk about how frustrating these things are. And we think it feels so good, and it does. It feels good to get it out into the world. But what I talk about, and I've actually blogged about it and done some podcast episodes about it, is that if we are not getting those feelings out, but then taking in some action steps, taking in some supportive conversations, and maybe even taking in some feedback of ways that we can actually improve the situation ourselves, then that conversation is all for naught. And that's where I really found that I, looking back in my patterns of, frustration, and then I'd be fine for a year or two, and then I would be frustrated again. I never got to the bottom of what it was that was truly burning me out. And if I would have realized those patterns sooner, which I'm glad that I didn't, because it ultimately led to burned in teacher. But if I would have taken time to really do some self-reflection on, okay, what is my true challenge here? And if I would have been honest enough and stopped the shame earlier, I would have been able to have the conversations that really needed to happen, not only with people that were surrounding me in my school and in my family, but really honest conversations with myself. I think that I really could have come to this realization earlier that I really do have the power to control my burnout. And it's not as easy as saying, I have the power, I can do it. It's definitely some action steps, involved, and some tough ones, some tough decisions to make. But that's ultimately what led from, my burnout to burned in teacher.
Yeah. I love that. So let's go there, if that's okay with you. Let's go there into, kind of like putting our finger on burnout. Like, it's obviously sort of an epidemic, at least in United States schools. We've got so many teachers that are, frustrated and considering leaving the profession. And I know when I got into teaching, they said that the average, I don't want to say lifespan, but like work span, let's say, of a teacher was 5 years. And I haven't checked the statistics on that, but based on all of the stuff that's coming down, I'm guessing that it might even be less than that anymore. Yeah. And so I'm wondering, like, let's go ahead and go there and put our finger on that burnout.
Yeah. So coincidentally, you bring up the 5-year mark, and that is still true today. The people that I work with the most, they're burned in teacher with either small group coaching or one-on-one coaching. They are not the newer teachers. They are actually the teachers that have been teaching for 5+ years, up to 20, so I'm very, very conscious of the people that I'm working with, that, they have that fire, that blaze, of passion for teaching. And burnout is called burnout for a reason. It's not a bolt of lightning in the middle of a sunshiny day, right? It is burnout because of repeated patterns of interaction or feelings that have not been addressed. And we just kind of shove them to the side for a couple of reasons. Maybe because we feel like we don't have time to address them, it's huge, the time issue. But another reason would be because we feel like maybe we are wrong, right? And it's us. We are the problem. And that's where that shame sets in. And you mix shame with frustration and anxiety and stress, and things that are really, really impactful typically hold a healthy amount of stress. But on the other hand, if we're feeling stress and anxiety because we are really feeling frustrated about our day-to-day activities or our interactions with either our students, their parents, our coworkers, our principals, things that we're seeing on the news, we're letting that stuff affect us. That's where we have to make a decision to become mentally strong, to become focused on our goals, focused on why we're doing what we're doing, and of course, what we can change in the future. And now even, this very moment, what we can change about our situation so that we can move forward and make it past that 5-year mark. And not just make it past that 5-year mark, but thrive past that 5-year mark, because it really does come down to us. And I know some teachers don't want to hear that, and not just teachers. I mean, burnout is a problem across the professions right now, hashtag burnout generation. There have been a lot of really good articles that have come out lately about burnout in general. And I think that what we can do as not just teachers, but as human beings, is to really get quiet, get still, and be really reflective of how we got to the place that we are now and what power and control we really do have over the things that we do from that point on to control it and beat it.
Yeah. Very good. And this is exactly where I was hoping this conversation would go.
Sure.
Okay, so now that we've kind of got a baseline on where we are and what it is, we've kind of put our finger on the pulse, so to speak. Let's start to dig out of that hole. What do you say? And I know that, from us talking a little bit off air, burnout isn't just burnout in and of itself. Like if you are burned out, then you are burned out and that's it. That there are different kind of like flavors and varieties of it, right?
Yes. So what I realized from my research on burnout is that there's not just one type. So what I have done is I created a teacher burnout quiz that you can take. It's 6 questions. It's 4 or 5 minutes at the most to take the quiz. And you can actually be identified as one of 3 types of burnout: burned and over it, burned and unbalanced, or burned and bored. And you could even come out on the other side of this quiz as not burned out, just need a slight adjustment. So you may in fact realize, hey, I'm not really burned out. I just have, maybe there was a small change that has happened that I need to address, because that's where the magic happens, is where you can identify it before it consumes you. Before you have, the Mondays and, you're having trouble driving to work in the morning. I know what that's like. So the quicker that we can name this burnout, the quicker you can begin to tame it. So that's step 1. That's what I tell my teachers to do in my Facebook group and in my email community is to take that quiz.
And in fact, with that quiz, we're going to have a link to that in the session resources for this session at the page where you're able to see this on the Ditch Summit. So if you want to take this, you can definitely go head over there and find that link. Just want to make sure that everybody knew that they could take that quiz.
Yeah,
okay, so that's step 1, right?
And it's free. It's free. You don't have to pay a dime for it. So once you take that quiz and you get your results of either burned and over it, burned and bored, or burned and unbalanced. And Matt, would you like me to go into detail about what each of those are?
Yes, actually, that'd be great.
Sure. So burned and over it is where you have been surrounded by negativity and apathy. Therefore, you have begun to become negative and apathetic yourself, whether it has to do with apathy of your students, they don't care, they're disengaged, to an administrator that maybe seems unengaged and isn't offering you the support that you feel like you deserve and need in order to thrive in your job. Burned and unbalanced is really where most of the teachers that take this assessment, they end up as burned and unbalanced, and for very good reason. These are the teachers who feel like there's so much to do, there's not enough time to do it. More and more and more keeps being piled on and nothing gets taken away. You feel like you're spending, or not feel like, but your reality is you're spending evenings and weekends grading and planning and prepping and entering data and analyzing data, all the things. And you can't imagine continuing in a profession that is just consuming you the way that this does. And then the third type is burned and bored, where you have fantastic relationships, or at least okay relationships. There's no drama at school. You have a good rapport with your students. You've also got great systems in place. You're not spending nights and weekends grading and entering data and all of that. You're actually leaving at a decent time every day. You aren't spending your weekends planning and prepping, but you just feel like something is off. You're a little bored by the monotony of the day in and day out. You're ready for a new challenge. So with that being said, Matt, I should also say that burned in teacher is not about making you feel like you have to stay in this specific position that you're in. So for example, when I was teaching first grade, when I started burned in teacher, I had to say that it was okay if I chose to stay in the classroom and continue teaching full time in addition to doing burned in teacher on the side. But I also had to tell myself, it's okay. It's part of my journey if I move on and I help support teachers and students in a different way. It's not about keeping you in your position. It's not about getting you out of education. It really, truly is all about you having the control and empowering you to take your next best step. So with that being said, those are the 3 types that you can come out on the other side as. And there have been teachers that I've worked with that are a hybrid of a couple of them. And there have been some teachers who have even gone so far as to, they take it obviously whenever we first start working together, and then they take it after we're finished And they have either changed to another type of burnout. For example, I've been working with another teacher. Her name is Sarah Kaminsky, and she has been so involved in the self-empowerment. She is just a different person than when I first met her. And she went from being burned and unbalanced to now she's feeling burned and a little bit bored. She's like, okay, I've got this figured out. I need to add a new challenge. Yeah. And she's not feeling bad about it. She's excited about it. She's like, what else can I do to impact my fellow teachers and my students that I work with? Mm-hmm. So she's looking at it as now, okay, now I am able to name where I am, and now I'm going to do something about it. I'm not going to continue to have the attitude of all this stuff is happening to me, and I've written about that in the blog too, about, stop being a victim of circumstance and being a taker of chance. And that's exactly what Sarah is doing.
Oh my goodness. Let me go back over that. Stop being a victim of circumstance, mm-hmm. and start being a
taker of chance.
Oh my goodness. I want to run right off to Adobe Spark and get on post and make that into like a picture quote or something.
Maybe I should. I haven't even thought about that. Thanks for the idea.
That's good. Yes, we're totally going to do that. That's great. Man, there's been like all of these great knowledge bombs like dropping in this session already. This is amazing. So
thank you.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about why we get burned out in the first place. We've talked about how burnout isn't just a global, well, not global. It is kind of a global thing, but like not a general thing.
Yeah.
And how there are specific parts of it and everything. And so now I think that we're ready to get over the burnout and start to be burned in. So I was wondering what kind of tips you have for us I'm like taking copious notes over here.
Good.
Right?
Yeah.
If you're burning over it, if you're burned and unbalanced, if you're burned and bored, or any combination of those, mm-hmm. Do you have any, silly, I'm asking like you might not. Why don't you give us some suggestions, some ideas, some tips on how we can beat that burnout?
Absolutely. So it's not enough just to name it. That can definitely, whenever I'm presenting breakout sessions or working with a group of teachers on helping them to actually, start this catalyst in this trajectory rather of getting out of burnout. Simply taking the quiz and putting a name on it and knowing the fact that, oh my gosh, I'm not crazy. I'm not a bad person. This is just where I am right now. This is the beginning of my journey. You can see people, they come in, and number one, when they come into one of my sessions or we start working together, their face is that of somebody who is extremely ashamed to be there. And I don't take it personally because I know what it's like. They come in with this look of like, did anybody see me? Did anybody see me come in? And so the first thing we do is we celebrate that we have stopped the shame. Brene Brown is a bit, obviously studies vulnerability and shame. And she, talks about the need to, you cannot change your circumstance if you are consumed by shame. And so that's what we talk about first. And then I have them actually right in front of me take the quiz. And their faces go from that of people who don't even know if they should be there to smiling and talking. And right there, Matt, is where we have, and I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it because I've seen the looks on these people's faces. It's like a student learning to read right in front of you. There's nothing more empowering and exciting than watching a teacher go, oh, I got it. This is me. This is what I'm saying to myself, because I have some things that you might be saying or doing or thinking in those descriptions. But the next step is, it's not enough to name it. We have to set ourselves on a path of growth. We have to be able to see that growth, just like I should have said this in my introduction. I taught for 12 years in the classroom, so I'm not coming from a place of not knowing what it's like, to be in the classroom full time and to have to work to engage my students and build relationships and shove that negativity out the door and close the door behind it. I know what it's like, but and we are taught, of course, best practices is to help students realize their growth, because if they don't see the growth, they don't see the point. And I think that's where we're really missing the mark on helping teachers with self-care and helping them to stay in the profession, because there are not enough bubble baths, pieces of chocolate cake, bottles of wine, runs, foot massages that are going to help you get out of burnout. You have to take specific and sometimes difficult action steps to get out of it. So what you can do when you take the quiz is you can opt in to receive a free teacher burnout cheat sheet. And this cheat sheet takes you through the 3 steps that you can take to start beating your burnout now, not when school starts, not, after you've reached year 5, but now this gives you kind of a growth path, a roadmap, if you will, to see where you are, what stage of burnout you're in, and how to actually see that change in thinking and actions to get burned in. So stage 0 is burned out. All right. And I actually have my stages here so that I make sure that I lay them out correctly for you. So if you are to stage 0, you are burned out. So you're feeling isolated. You're feeling that shame and that stress. You really have done nothing. You've done nothing different. I say DSD, do something different, right? And I know you preach that and ditch that textbook. And I said ditch that burnout because of a conversation that we had back in January.
I think you're seeding the idea of another book at some point in the future.
I know. You and I, we keep coming back to this, Matt. We're going to have to talk more about this.
Yeah.
You're actually thinking about quitting when you are at a 0. You are as burned out as you can possibly be. What we want to do is just get you to the next stage. The next stage is stage 1. That's build your spark. We need to find that spark. We don't need to ignite a flame right away. We don't have to get you 100% burned in. We just want to move you to the next stage. So that is where you are feeling guilty, maybe a little bit. You've now named your burnout. You now are starting to learn a little bit, and you're like, oh my gosh, you're feeling a little bit guilty, not ashamed, but now moving to a little bit of guilt. You might be feeling a little paralyzed because now it's like, okay, I've named this burnout. I know what stage I'm in. Now it's like, I have so much work to do. And that can either be invigorating or it can be paralyzing. I know I struggle sometimes with that paralysis by overanalysis. And this is where you might just be sitting here saying, oh my gosh, where do I even start? I have so much work to do.
Yeah. Can I interject something really fast on
sure.
that? I heard somebody, I've dropped this into presentations and speeches and blog posts and stuff like that. So if any of you are watching this and you've heard me say this already, forgive me. But I heard somebody have a really good definition of overwhelm, because that's really what you're talking about there is overwhelm, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
It's not about having too many options. It's just about not knowing where to start.
Yes.
So having and I love the way you said that. You said that if you feel that paralysis and there's so many options, some people are excited about having all of those options and some people feel paralyzed by it. And I think the difference is that the ones who are excited about it know where they want to start or are willing to just pick some place and get started. Whereas the other ones are like, there are all of these choices and I don't know which choice to make. And
right.
You were saying with stage 0, do something different. I wonder if maybe in stage 1, it's just do something,
Exactly. And that's honestly where I preach, just take your next imperfect action. And Matt, this is where, oh my gosh, we could just get in so deep here. Take your next imperfect action. Let me say that word again, imperfect. This is where, Matt, a lot of teachers that I work with are very proud to wear that badge of a type A personality. And Brene Brown, again, I feel like she and I could just sit down and talk for hours. She talks about this syndrome of that perfection, that need for that gold star, that need for affirmation from everyone around us about, wow, you're such a great teacher. And of course we want to be told we're great teachers, right? But when we approach every decision we make from that perfection standpoint, we are going to burn ourselves out. We are going to overwhelm ourselves by that expectation that everything we do needs to be Instagram worthy or Pinterest worthy, or, everybody needs to notice how amazing I am. And I am not poo-pooing drive. I'm not poo-pooing you wanting to be excellent at your job. We need excellent teachers that want to do good, but we have to do good from the right place. So I really preach taking that imperfect action and even, dare I say, B- work. If it will get the job done and you are still going to see growth and it is impacting your students' success, then that has to be good enough sometimes.
Yes, the B minus. Oh, you just like put a name on something that, yeah. That reminds me, I talk about, and Kim Strobel is another speaker that we're going to have in the summit.
A good friend of mine. I love Kim.
Yes, that's right. And she talks about the science of happiness, and one of the things that we both learned about is the idea of the minimum effective dose. I learned about it from Tim Ferriss, who wrote the 4-Hour Work Week. And he talks about what is the smallest amount possible to get the results that you want. Yeah. So that's like saying, if you can do 15 minutes of work and get the result that you want, why would you do 2 hours of work to get the exact same result? It's not about being a slacker and finding the easiest way, but it's like finding what you need to do to get that effective dose, right?
Yes, absolutely. And a conversation that I've had with Chris Jones, a principal that was on the podcast too, and Kim was on my podcast, I think episode 3. It was a really good one. I would definitely suggest listening to that episode. And that's actually where we first met and just knew that we had to continue talking. But Chris said, when your core values are not aligning with what you are doing every day, that is where burnout can really set in. And that really stuck with me. And coincidentally, in my Burned In Teacher Training ebook and in the course that will be coming out very soon, we talk about core values. We need to, number one, have them. Not a lot. And, Brene Brown says no more than 2. But we need to make sure, and we can change them. Core values can definitely evolve and change over time, depending on what season of life we are in. But that's where this comes from too. If what you are doing and as hard as you are working is not matching up with your core values and what is really, really important to you in your stage of life right now, then you've got to do something different. And it can be big changes or small changes, but you have to make them in order to be able to move, especially to move throughout this success roadmap that I've created for Burned In Teacher. Mm-hmm. So we were just talking, if it's okay, I'll go ahead and continue with the stages.
Yeah, please do.
We're just talking about build your spark, which is stage 1. And that is where you begin to realize how much impact you can have on your own future. Right? We can't change the past. And in fact, this is where the serenity prayer comes in that I talk with teachers a lot about, having the serenity to accept the things you cannot change, which is the past, the courage to change the things that you can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So, and that can be really empowering too, when you're thinking about your next best step, how can I move forward? So you might be thinking in stage 1, how did I get to where I am? Because reflecting on the past and living in the past are 2 different things. So we really do need to identify in this stage, how is it that I got to where I am? What brought me to this point, to this current reality? And whenever we start to really reflect on those things, then we can move on and say that you are in stage 2. All right. This is build your ignition. So we had a spark, but now we're moving on to trying to reignite that fire again. So this is where you're now feeling validated. You don't feel crazy. You don't feel ashamed. You know that there is something truly, I don't want to say wrong, but there are definitely some changes that need to take place. And you're also feeling curious. You're really wondering, okay, what are my possibilities? If I've already come this far, what else can I change in my future? And by the way, Matt, this can also be personally as well. So this is where you're starting to open conversations. You're starting to seek solutions, possible solutions. And a lot of this comes from, I encourage brain dumping, not a beautiful, journaling practice yet, maybe. And it may not, my journaling practice is very messy. But this is where you're actually finding the value in writing these things down and making plans, not lesson plans, but plans of action. And and then you're also starting to think about, what is truly challenging me? Kind of like what we talked about earlier, Matt, what is really the bottom of where all of this is coming from? And this might be, man, and for me, personally, it was my husband and I were living in a place that we didn't want to live anymore, but we were living there because we felt like we are here, therefore we must always stay here. And that's a lie. It's a tough decision and it's hard, but we made the decision to change it. And we are so much happier personally now. Now, if I was still in the first grade classroom, and honestly, Matt, too, I should have said this earlier, a lot of teachers that I work with, they don't want to leave education. They want to stay in the classroom, or they want to stay in education. They do not desire to leave. And I know this because I surveyed my community, and this is what they said. They said, we don't want to leave education, but we cannot continue living like this. We have to change something. And that's what these identifiers and these stages can do, is they can set you on that path. So in this stage 2 of building your ignition, you are really thinking about what you love, thinking about those core values, what you value, what you miss about what you used to do. And if I was still in the classroom, I would be asking myself, is first grade really the best place for me? And my answer now would be no. I feel like I, as a teacher, worked better and was more engaged with students who were older, 3rd grade and above. So when I left the classroom last year, I've been out for a full year to do this full time. I didn't leave with the intention of never going back. If I were to go back, I would definitely seek 3rd grade or up, because I know that about myself now from these reflection practices. So after you're starting to really feel that validation, really reflecting on what's challenging you, now you can move on to stage 3, and that's building your flame. So that's where you are feeling brave. You're feeling more activated. You are not just thinking about the changes and reflecting on the things you need to, that brought you to this place. You are actually taking action. You're having the conversations. You're opening up conversations that you never would have opened up before. You're making changes either to the way that you talk. You're making changes to your teacher brand, which is part of the burned in process. Or you're even changing the people that you are spending time with, because we are, Matt, and you probably know this, we are the average of the 5 people that we hang around with the most.
I love that quote. I love that. That's so true.
It's so true. And we have intentional and unintentional relationships. And Tim Elmore from Growing Leaders, Growing Young Leaders rather, he really helped me to verbalize this, because I knew it, he knew it. We kind of brought these two thoughts together. We have unintentional relationships. I mean, how often have you worked in a school or been involved in a community where you have people that are brought together and you unintentionally are working together, but you get along really well, right? Or maybe you don't. Those are just things you can't choose who you're teaching with. You can't choose who the principal is. You can't choose the students who are in your classroom. And you can, of course, be kind, respectful, cooperative, collaborative with those people. But those 5 people are the people that you intentionally bring into your life. And that could coincidentally be somebody that you get to work with. I mean, how lucky are you to work with someone that has an impact on you that way? So then, people in your personal life, professional life, mentors, heroes, people that are going to build you up. And when you come to them and your blood pressure is through the roof, rather than them throwing logs onto that fire and your blood pressure going up higher, they are the people that are bringing that blood pressure down. They are the people that you're walking away with tactics, strategies, a new idea. They helped you to seek solutions, and now you can move on in a better place than what you were. Those are 2 different conversations, right?
Yeah.
The blood pressure going up and the blood pressure going down.
Yes.
So you're really thinking about the impact that you can make, not only on your own life, but on the students that you are with. And then you can move on to stage 4, which is build your fire. So see, we've gone from burned out to having a spark to building an ignition, building a flame. Now we've got a full-blown fire. This is where we have become extremely intentional. There are no more coincidences happening with how we react to a situation. We are engaged in our daily life. We are paying attention. We're no longer walking head down, shoulders slumped. We are up, we are looking, we are seeking, and we are engaged in our life, both at school and not. We're finding sources of inspiration. So we're actually seeking people and things around us to inspire us to keep moving on this path that we've decided on. We're making plans for the future. Again, whether personally or professionally, we're working with others to create that change. We are no longer in isolation. Isolation is a foreign word to us now. We are engaging with those around us that want to improve their lives as well. We're thinking about what we can do to prevent this from happening again. Because being a burned-in teacher is also not naive to the fact that there are going to be hardships. You're going to be thrown some curveballs. Your principal that you love and is so respectful and supportive is going to leave. And you're going to have a principal come in that is not and will not ever be the principal before him or her. It will happen. Maybe not to you, but it will happen to somebody else who's either watching this or out in the world. It's happened to several people that I know. You're going to have that class. You're going to have them, right? Or that student. So you're going to have to make plans for what will I do when this happens. And typically what I tell teachers is you go through the burned in process again. You're already ahead of where you were when you first started. Go through it again. Really do some reassessment, reevaluating, planning, for that future. And you're thinking about what and who you can bring into your life to continually support you. Because you feeling like you have to be the only hero in your life, although you are one of the most important ones, is not true. You have to have other superheroes around you to help you whenever when you're having a hard time. And then stage 5 is what we're going for. And that is burned in. This is where you're feeling empowered, supported, organized, balanced. And I struggle with that word balance because balance, work-life balance is non-existent. It's not
an illusion, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a fallacy. I heard somebody talk about, needing to instead strive for work-life harmony. So, if things are falling apart in your personal life, you've got to put more weight and time and effort into building your personal life up to a place where you are not feeling burnt out of your personal life, right? And then, you won't be able to give so much time and balance to that, to school. But if things are falling apart in your professional life at school, you have to give yourself grace and say, right now, the dishes are going to sit dirty. Or my husband or my wife is going to have to do the laundry. I've got to give this attention. So making sure that you are seeking support, not only from teachers and principals, but from your family as well. Delegating, simplifying. Delegating is a huge part of this process, and realizing that you are not the only one who can do all the things. You are, of course, you're thinking of, you're having daily assurance. You have either a daily journaling practice or a reflection practice, meditation, prayer, whatever it is that is helping you to build your mental strength and to prepare for having a day where if and when things go awry, that you can bring yourself back to that place of focus. And then, of course, you are really thinking about your passions and your strengths. Where we put the most focus is what we are going to focus on. So for example, if you say, none of my students are engaged, nobody cares, I guarantee you there's at least one student in your classroom who cares and who is engaged. But we are choosing to focus on all of the students who are not engaged. Think about, when you get a report card, when you were a kid, what was the one grade that your family focused on? The lowest grade, right? When you could have had A's and B's and maybe a C plus, and I'm a fan of B minus, they're going to focus on that D. They're going to go for the lowest one instead of celebrating the highest grade. So really choosing to be focused on the positive and to change the things that you can is what, and that's just a couple pieces from each of those stages.
Yeah.
But you can now see, right, that transformation from burned out to burned in and what it really means.
Oh my goodness. I'm like sitting over here again, still taking copious notes about all this, getting all of the stages down. Oh my goodness. That's like, that just like blew my mind. I mean, you can very clearly.
That's what I'm hoping to do, right?
Yeah. You can like very clearly see where you are in that process. And the thing I love about it, I think, is that there is a path forward no matter where you are.
Yes. And if you start to fall back, you start to lose those habits of being burned in, you can then say, wow, I feel like I was at a 3 for a while, and then I've gotten a little bit lazy, and now I'm feeling more a 2, a 1. And I've even had a lot of teachers who have told me, I'm like a version 1.5. They're a mix between 1 and 2. That's totally fine. Just like students, we can't just slap a person on paper and exactly define who and what they are. So you do with this roadmap, whatever makes sense to you, but this just at least gives you a place to strive to be. And it doesn't have to be fast. It doesn't have to happen within a week. It can take as long as you need. Again, your next best and perfect steps.
Yes, that's right. Oh my goodness. That was one of the big takeaways from all of those stages. You said, what is your next best imperfect step? That is so liberating. That just gives you the confidence and the power to go forward and make that next step and not feel paralyzed and realize that we're going to pick something and we're going to try it, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It's so good.
Yeah.
So good.
Thank you. Well, and the fact is there's no one way to get to one place. I mean, if you even just compare it to a map, of course, you have ways that you can get there quicker and faster. You have detours you can take. There's no one way to live this life.
Right.
And that really, what we don't want to do is be climbing that ladder, climbing, and then realizing that ladder is up against the wrong wall.
Yeah. Yeah.
What we're doing here is we're just trying to help. I'm trying to help teachers to realize right now, this is my next best step. Okay, maybe I need to take some steps back and go a different direction, because now I've even learned more about myself from these little steps than I had for years trying to take these giant leaps, So that's step 2 of the burned out, or the teacher burnout cheat sheet, because there actually is a step 3 that I take teachers through. So I can go into that, or if you have another question, I can answer that.
Yeah, let's, well, I did have something that I was really interested in having us touch on, and that's the idea, when we were sort of discussing what this conversation here might be about, one of the things that you mentioned was talking about how you feel about what you do. And I think this has kind of been seeded all throughout the whole thing. That really hit home for me about how we have to be cognizant of how we feel. And I would love for you to touch on this a little bit, because I know for me, that was a big part of my teaching career. I got, maybe 4 or 5 years into my teaching career or something, and I was very much stuck in a rut. But I also knew that teaching was either where I needed to be right now, or I didn't have any other options at the time. So it was like, this is going to happen, one way or the other. I'm going to be in this classroom for a little while. And I started to think about how I needed to find my joy in teaching. I needed to find what I loved about it, and I needed to find a way to be content in it. At very least, be content. Even if I didn't get to the level of joy, I at very least needed to be at content. And so I did some digging and some praying and some soul searching about why it was that I was in teaching in the first place, to get refocused on all of that. And that made a huge difference to me. It was because, not that I was doing things totally differently, but I was trying to focus on how I felt about what I did. Sure. And I know that was so huge. And I know that you wanted to touch on that a little bit. So I wanted to turn you loose on that.
Sure. So something I'm really actually jealous of people, not just teachers, who are truly content. They are happy to have reached this goal of being a teacher. This is all they wanted to be. And now they're in the classroom, and they are just going to be the best darn teacher they can possibly be. And they have, for some reason, that innate mental strength that they can just kind of sift through the garbage and filter it all out. And they just stay focused on why they're teaching. But unfortunately, sometimes content and settling also get confused, and that's where I really struggle, because like you, Matt, I'm very, very driven. When I meet that goalpost, I move the goalpost. And that's where it's exhausting. And I think a lot of teachers sometimes do that. Sometimes, like we even just talked about a little bit ago, good enough is good enough. And if you're happy being in the classroom and you have things that work, deciding to not just find the joy and find the happiest, but make it so. There's a difference between, and I've heard this too for like fitness and well-being and health, is that you don't find the time, you make the time. So sometimes, if you can't find the joy, you can't find the happiness, you have to make it so. And this is really making me think, Matt, about teacher brand, which is what U stands for in Burned In. It's understand your teacher brand. And so this is really, your brand is what people say it is. So maybe you're being really hard on yourself when you shouldn't be, because if you do survey your classmates, your students, and you survey your teachers that you work with and your administrator, and you say, hey, what adjectives, and be honest, lay it on me. What adjectives would you use to describe me? And if they come back and the words are positive, uplifting, focused, if those are the words that people are using to describe you, then maybe you need to show yourself a little bit of grace, because we are our own worst critics and we are living inside of our own heads a lot of times. So if your students say that you are helpful and kind and patient, then maybe what you're feeling is not what is actually the truth. On the flip side of that, if you do ask your students and those that you work with what words they would use to describe you, and they say stressed, anxious, angry, sad, then your feelings, again, now you're already at stage 2. You're validated. You know that this is what you are projecting out into the world, and who I call your people who you want to impact the most. Mm-hmm. So they will be honest with you, especially if you open it up with, hey guys, I'm doing just what I preach. I want to make changes. I want to grow, So if you approach it from that place, again, of understanding, people will be honest with you, And, the whole idea of teacher brand really was born out of what is a personal brand, which is really, it comes down to, what do people think and say about you when you're not around? And it's different than a judgment. A judgment is based on one interaction. A brand is based on repeated actions, repeated behaviors, repeated interactions with you, where people can literally predict what you're going to do and say when you are around them, because that is your brand. And that really can affect a lot of what we are feeling about our careers, not just this year, but in the future, and about how you felt about it in the past, et cetera. It really, again, you might roll your eyes at me, those of you who are listening, it's going to come down to you and what you choose to feel and what you choose to pay attention to.
Yep. Absolutely. Oh my goodness. This has been so amazing. So many actionable things, so much wisdom and quotable moments. I don't know if you realize it, but in that last part where we were talking about how you feel about what you do, there were like multiple big quote moments there. Content isn't settling. That was one of the big ones. Don't just find your happiness, make it so. I'm like over here going, yes, this is exactly it. You're like nailing it. This is so good. What adjectives would you use to describe me? I was like, oh, this is just such good stuff. And I know that, Amber, you have poured your heart and soul into creating resources that can help teachers to get through this. So if you are watching this video and you're thinking, I love Amber, I love Amber's message, I want to get more of this, there's a ton of good stuff out there. So Amber, can you direct the people, anybody who's watching this, to where they can get more if they are totally loving this?
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt, for saying all those things. I'm very flattered. So burnedinteacher.com is my website. If you want to go straight to the podcast where I interview experts and teachers and I go solo, all in an effort. And I will just tell you the tagline. It's 1 part burnout, all other parts action, inspiration, and support for teachers dealing with burnout. That's what the podcast mission is to open these conversations. So you can go to burnedinteacher.com/podcast, and that will take you to the lists of podcasts that are there. I have 37 episodes. Episode 37 just came out today. And if you want to go to the blog, burnedinteacher.com, you can click on the blog there. And that is where I have turned some of my biggest tips and takeaways out of these podcast episodes, turn them into a blog form, sometimes a YouTube video. And then you can, of course, read all the way back to the beginning of all of this, April 2016, where I'm blogging about how I'm using ed tech with my kids and firsties, and my journey. I share my journey out of burnout through actually going through the 7 habits and how I started to apply those to my life. So that's the biggest way that you can find me. I'm on social media at Burned In Teacher in all platforms. So that's one way you can find me. DM me, email me at support. I have an ebook that just came out, bit.ly/burnedinbook. If you're looking to become burned in and actually go through this burned in process, which is an 8-step process from surviving to thriving in education. And I'm actually turning that into a course. That will be, so that will have a lot more resources, videos, downloadable worksheets and things like that. So that's, all in an effort to help these teachers, help you to take your next best step and to have those aha moments that we want so badly in our students, but we really need to have in our own lives.
Yeah.
So lots of different ways to find me, get support, free support
Yes.
as well, so those are the main ways to find me.
That's great. Yeah, that's awesome. And if you've been paying attention to this and you realize that we saw all of the stages, and that's step 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you go on to step 3 and you can get that in the cheat sheet.
Yep.
Check out the resources for this session and you can go get that cheat sheet and you can go finish off the rest of the journey. So
that's right.
Awesome. Amber, this has been amazing. This has been so good. Thank you so much for taking the time. And to you who's watching, thank you so much for joining us for the Ditch Summit, which is sponsored by Q, because we do love Q, and powered by Adobe. And we'll see you on the next session.